This is a game that I played 3 years ago. It shows some of the typical ideas in the Sveshnikov variation of the Sicilian defense. I was playing with the black pieces. So these moves kind of define the Sveshnikov variation. White has here two options, either bishop takes f6 immediately or knight d5 first. So white played knight d5. By exchanging on f6, white makes this knight on d5 stronger. Now white has to develop the bishop somewhere, but e2 and d3 are not the best squares. So first of all, white secures the a4 square, the c4 square for the bishop by undermining the black pawn chain. It goes a4, black takes, and now white wants to play pawn to b4 and make a big weakness out of the pawn on a6. So black prevents that. Now bishop c4 or b8, attacking on b2. White defends. And by playing king to h8, black prepares to undermine the white center with f5. And that is the main line still. Here white either castles and allows f5, or he plays knight to e3, knight c to e3, and tries to prevent f5 for the time being. And white in the game chose a less common line, but a pretty aggressive one. He attacked the bishop. It's obviously bad to take on h4 because of queen h5, with some really bad threats on the h-file. So I have to go to h6. White continues the pressure on the king side, so he threatens to play pawn to g5, and he also strengthens the control of the f5 square, but definitely this weakens the white king side a little bit. So I don't want to be shut down with g5, so I have to play bishop f4, and now white puts pressure on the bishop with queen to f3. And here I was not sure what to do. It took me a while to figure out what's the best way to continue here. I was thinking of undermining the white pawn structure with something like pawn to h5, but that didn't seem to work out too well. So I just realized that if white even takes on f4, this isn't such a big deal for black, and this can be allowed, because if white takes, then I take, and my knight gets an excellent square on e5, which may compensate for some material losses if I have to suffer any. So I just played a normal developing move. This puts the pressure on the knight and also on the bishop, and by doing that, there's also some pressure exerted on the pawn on b3, which is still placed on the open file. So it's probably the best continuation in this position. And here white has to figure out really what to do. He can't castle kingside because then the h4 pawn would fall. He he has to somehow justify the aggression on the king side. So he has to do something decisive. At the same time, there's some annoying ideas, like if white takes on f4, I can then take on c4, and if white takes with the rook, I'm going to be able to capture on b3, and in some lines, if white takes with the pawn on c4, then I might be able to play rook to b1 and hit this rook in some lines, say like in some line like this. Take, he takes, and there's this annoying problem, and this rook is getting lost. So this to some degree, this kind of line to some degree explains White's next move, which came pretty unexpected to me. So he played king to e2. It's a pretty interesting way to bring the rook into the game, but basically the rook is planning to come to h1, to d1 possibly. So I wanted to secure my bishop on f4, so I played bishop takes, and now with this move I'm just developing my queen. I'm attacking the bishop. White retreats, and now he wants to play something like knight here and stop my aggression in the center and secure the weakness on d5, the outpost on d5, and that didn't seem too good to me. I was a little bit concerned about being shut down in this pawn structure. So I started to look for ways to exploit the insecure position of the white king, and I just had to evaluate what happens if I open up the center directly. And I found a pretty nice pawn break, which does sacrifice a pawn, but gives black a very good initiative for the pawn, which allows him a strong attack against the white king in most lines, and in the game white wasn't able to control that initiative. So I break through in the center first with d5. If the bishop ever takes, then I take the bishop and I am going to take on b3, and with the white pieces so loosely placed, this won't be good. So he has to take with a pawn, and by taking with the e-pawn he lessens the pressure, the control over the f5 square, so now I can actually open up the f-file, which is pretty nice given that at some point my queen and rook will be looking at the f-file and possibly on f2. So white could take on f5. If he tries to keep the game closed, my center suddenly becomes very strong. I can play knight to g6, and then after h5 there's some intermediate move like pawn to e4, and all these pawns advancing in front of the white king. This seemed very promising to me. So maybe because of all that, white decided to play differently. So he played knight to e3, he took with the queen, I exchanged, I'm opening up the f-file, and now I'm coming in with a knight. It's putting pressure on e3 and also attacking this pawn on h4 in some lines possibly. So white defends the pawn on e3 while keeping an eye on the h4 pawn. So I play knight to d6, and this attacks the bishop, but also indirectly this pawn. So white protects the bishop. I take. If he takes with the rook, I get to take on b3. So he took with the queen instead. And now I found an interesting move which allows me to win the pawn. And winning a pawn in this position also opens up the white king. So from here things are looking pretty good for black. Queen to e4, just moving the queen away, and now I take on b3, and with all the white pawns advanced so far and being so loose and unprotected, this position fell apart pretty quickly for white. He took another pawn just to give him something in return for the open position of the king, but the black pieces are just coming in. I don't want to trade queens. Now I'm attacking on h4, among other things, still keeping the queen on the board. And now the queen is coming from this side, or here possibly. And after this move, white resigned because he's losing all of his material, and probably with checks. So if he goes king here, then rook comes here, winning this rook, and then I'm defending the back rank because I'm still guarding the c8 square. So, and there's really not much better move for white here. So white resigned, and I was pretty happy that my idea of the pawn breakthrough in this position has worked so effectively.